Little girl shows her dinner to a millionaire, not knowing this act would change her life forever. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Ruby in the comments. A wonderful piece of news will reach you soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Morrison mansion as Alexander paced across the Italian marble floor, his Armani suit wrinkled from hours of restless movement. At 32, he had built an empire that most men twice his age could only dream of, yet tonight he felt utterly powerless. The call from Dr. Matthews still echoed in his mind, each word cutting deeper than any business failure he'd ever experienced. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. The third miscarriage in 2 years indicates that natural conception may not be viable for Mrs. Morrison. The emotional and physical trauma." Victoria sat curled in the oversized leather chair by the fireplace, her delicate frame seeming smaller than ever. Her auburn hair fell like a curtain around her face, hiding the tears that had been flowing intermittently for the past 3 hours. She clutched the ultrasound photo from their last appointment, the one that had given them hope for exactly 12 weeks before shattering their dreams once again. "Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep losing them." Alexander's heart constricted as he moved toward his wife, kneeling beside her chair. For all his success in boardrooms and business deals, he felt helpless in the face of Victoria's pain. His calloused hands, rough from his early days working construction before his first startup took off, gently cupped her tear-stained cheeks. "We'll figure this out, Vic. There are other options. Adoption, surrogacy." "No." Victoria's voice was firm, despite her tears. "I wanted to carry our baby. I wanted to feel them grow inside me to give birth to our child. That's what I've dreamed of since we got married." Alexander pulled her into his arms, feeling her body tremble against his chest. They had met 7 years ago when she was working as a pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital, and he was just another ambitious entrepreneur with big dreams and empty pockets. She had been volunteering at a charity event for underprivileged kids when their eyes met across a crowded room. Her compassion for children had been one of the first things that drew him to her, and now it felt like the cruelest irony. "Remember what you told me on our wedding day?" Alexander murmured into her hair. "That love isn't about what we can create together, but what we can give to the world. There are children out there who need us, Vic. Children who need a mother like you." Victoria pulled back, her emerald eyes searching his face. "You really think adoption could work for us?" "I think," Alexander said, brushing a tear from her cheek, "that maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe our child isn't waiting to be born. Maybe they're already here, waiting for us to find them." The next morning brought crisp October air and a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria had awakened before dawn, researching adoption agencies and reading success stories online. Alexander found her in his home office, surrounded by printed articles and application forms, her laptop displaying the website of Hope Springs Adoption Services. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, not looking up from the screen. "About children who need us. Look at this." She turned the laptop toward him, showing a page filled with photos and brief descriptions of children waiting for adoption. Alexander's throat tightened as he read the stories. Kids who had lost parents, been abandoned, or removed from unsafe situations. "This little girl, Ruby." Victoria pointed to a photo of a 7-year-old with bright hazel eyes and sandy brown hair pulled into pigtails. "She's been in foster care for 2 years. Both parents died in a car accident when she was 5. She's currently staying with an elderly couple who applied to be foster parents specifically for her case, but they can't officially adopt due to their ages and health concerns." Alexander studied the photo. Ruby was sitting on a swing, her legs dangling, wearing a dress that looked handmade but clean and pressed. Despite everything she had endured, her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that suggested an indomitable spirit. "She loves drawing, apparently," Victoria continued, scrolling through the profile. "And she wants to learn to read better so she can become a teacher someday. Alex, she's been waiting for a permanent family for 2 years." What's the process?" Alexander asked, already knowing that whatever barriers existed, he would find a way through them. "Initial application, then background checks, financial verification, home study evaluation, and counseling sessions. The agency estimates 4 to 6 months for the complete process, though emergency placements can sometimes move faster." Victoria paused, her voice becoming uncertain. "Alex, what if we're not ready? What if we can't be the parents she needs?" Alexander sat on the edge of his desk, taking her hands in his. "Vic, you've spent years caring for sick children, comforting families during their worst moments. You've held other people's babies while they fought for their lives. If anyone is ready to be a mother, it's you. But what about you? You work 16-hour days. Your phone never stops ringing. How can you be a father with everything else you have going on?" Alexander had been asking himself the same question. His tech company, Morrison Dynamics, was in the middle of expanding into 3 new markets. He had board meetings, investor presentations, and product launches that demanded his attention. But looking at Ruby's photo, something shifted inside him. "I'll make time," he said simply. "I'll hire more people, delegate more responsibilities. None of this matters if we don't have a family to share it with." Victoria stood and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "Are you sure about this, Alex? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." 2 weeks later, they sat in the sterile waiting room of Hope Springs Adoption Services, both dressed conservatively and clutching folders containing their completed preliminary paperwork. Alexander wore a navy suit instead of his usual black, hoping to appear more approachable. Victoria had chosen a soft blue dress and minimal jewelry, wanting to look maternal rather than wealthy. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison?" A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and greying hair approached them. "I'm Sarah Chen, the caseworker assigned to Ruby's placement. Thank you for coming in today." They followed her to a small office decorated with children's artwork and family photos, success stories from previous adoptions. Sarah settled behind her desk and opened a thick file. "I've reviewed your preliminary application. Your financial stability is certainly not a concern, and Mrs. Morrison's background in pediatric nursing is impressive. However, I do have some questions about expectations and lifestyle adjustments." For the next hour, they discussed everything from disciplinary philosophies to educational priorities. Sarah asked pointed questions about their travel schedules, social obligations, and plans for balancing work and family life. Alexander found himself promising things he'd never thought possible, delegating major decisions to his VP, limiting business travel, clearing his weekends for family time. The couple currently caring for Ruby, Harold and Martha Williams, they've been foster parents for over 20 years, Sarah explained. Harold is 73, Martha is 71. They specifically requested to foster Ruby after her parents' accident because they knew the family through their church. They've been Ruby's primary caregivers since the accident, but they can't officially adopt due to their ages and Harold's recent heart condition. Any adoptive family would need to understand that Ruby has formed strong attachments to them. "We wouldn't want to separate her from people she loves," Victoria said immediately. "We'd want them to remain part of her life." Sarah smiled for the first time during the meeting. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Would you be interested in meeting Ruby and the Williams family next week? Nothing formal, just a chance to see how everyone gets along." Alexander and Victoria exchanged glances. This was happening faster than they had expected, but the prospect of meeting Ruby sent excitement coursing through both of them. "We'd love that," Alexander said. "What should we expect? Just be yourselves. Ruby is a remarkable little girl, but she's been through significant trauma. She might be shy at first, or she might talk your ear off. Harold is a retired mechanic, and Martha worked as a seamstress. They live on Social Security and Harold's small pension. They've provided Ruby with enormous love and stability, but they have very limited resources for extras." As they left the agency, Victoria gripped Alexander's arm tightly. "Alex, what if she doesn't like us? What if we say the wrong thing?" "Then we'll learn from it and try again," Alexander replied, though his own nerves were jangling. He had negotiated million-dollar deals and presented to rooms full of skeptical investors, but the thought of meeting a 7-year-old girl felt infinitely more terrifying and important. That evening, they sat in their home theater, supposedly watching a movie, but both lost in their own thoughts. Victoria had spent the afternoon researching child psychology and age-appropriate conversation topics. Alexander had started mentally rearranging his schedule, something he'd never done for anyone or anything before. "What do you think she's like?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Beyond what's in her file, I mean." Alexander paused the movie and turned to face his wife. "I think she's probably braver than both of us put together. Any child who can smile like that after losing her parents and living in uncertainty for 2 years, that takes courage we can't even imagine." "I keep wondering about practical things," Victoria admitted. "Like, what if she has nightmares? What if she doesn't like the food we eat? What if she misses Harold and Martha so much she regrets coming to live with us?" "We'll figure it out, Vic. Whatever she needs, whatever makes her feel safe and loved, we'll learn." Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with autumn leaves creating a golden carpet across the Seattle suburbs. Alexander adjusted his rearview mirror for the 3rd time as they pulled into the driveway of 1247 Maple Street. The house was small, but well-maintained, with a freshly painted white picket fence and flower boxes under the windows that spoke of loving care despite modest means. "Alex, your hands are shaking," Victoria observed, reaching over to squeeze his fingers. "I haven't been this nervous since I pitched my first startup to investors," he admitted, staring at the front door with its cheerful fall wreath. "At least then I knew what I was talking about." Victoria laughed softly, though her own voice betrayed her anxiety. "We just need to be ourselves. Sarah said Ruby is expecting us, and the Williams family knows we're coming for an informal visit." As they approached the front door, Alexander noticed the small details that painted a picture of the family's life. A child's bicycle with training wheels sat beside the porch steps, carefully chained to a post. Wind chimes made from painted stones hung from the eaves, each one bearing what looked like a child's artwork. A small vegetable garden showed signs of recent harvest. Before they could knock, the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 70s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind blue eyes magnified slightly by wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a floral house dress, covered by a hand-knitted cardigan, and her smile was warm but cautious. "You must be the Morrisons," she said, stepping aside to invite them in. "I'm Martha Williams. Please come in. Harold is in the kitchen making coffee, and Ruby is. Well, she's been pacing around the living room for the past hour, asking every 5 minutes when you'd arrive." The interior of the house was immaculate despite its age. The furniture was older but well cared for, with hand-crocheted doilies on the end tables and family photos covering every available surface. Alexander noticed immediately that while everything was clean and tidy, there were signs of careful budgeting: a television that was at least 15 years old, a couch that had been reupholstered rather than replaced, and windows that could use updating. "Ruby, sweetheart," Martha called toward the back of the house. "The nice people I told you about are here." The sound of quick footsteps preceded the appearance of a small figure in the doorway. Ruby Williams was even more beautiful in person than in her photographs. Her sandy brown hair was braided with care, adorned with small purple ribbons that matched her hand-me-down dress. But it was her eyes that captured Alexander's attention. Large, expressive hazel eyes that seemed too wise for a 7-year-old, holding depths of experience that no child should possess. "Hi," Ruby said shyly, peering around Martha's legs. "Are you really rich like Grandma Martha said?" "Ruby!" Martha exclaimed, her cheeks flushing pink. "We don't ask personal questions like that." Alexander knelt down to Ruby's eye level, a smile tugging at his lips despite his nervousness. "It's okay, Martha. Hi, Ruby. I'm Alexander, but you can call me Alex. And yes, I have a lot of money, but you know what? Having money isn't nearly as important as having people you love." Ruby's eyes widened with interest. "Really? But Grandpa Harold says money helps buy groceries and keeps the lights on." "Grandpa Harold is very smart," Victoria interjected, also kneeling down. "I'm Victoria. Alex and I heard that you like to draw. Is that true?" Ruby's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I love drawing. Want to see my pictures? I drew one of a castle yesterday and another one of a puppy that looks just like Mrs. Henderson's dog from next door." "We'd love to see them," Alexander said, and he was surprised to realize he genuinely meant it. Ruby's excitement was infectious. "Harold," Martha called toward the kitchen, "come meet the Morrisons." A tall, thin man with weathered hands and kind eyes emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of steaming mugs. Harold Williams was clearly a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. His fingers bore the permanent stains of a mechanic, and his posture spoke of decades of bending over car engines. But his smile was warm as he approached, though Alexander noticed a slight shuffle in his walk and the way he favored his left side. "Pleasure to meet you, folks," Harold said, setting down the tray carefully. "Ruby's been talking about this visit all week. Haven't you, sweetheart?" Ruby nodded enthusiastically. "Grandpa Harold, can I show them my room and my drawings and the garden where we grew tomatoes?" "Slow down there, little bit," Harold chuckled, though Alexander noticed him reaching for his chest briefly. "Let our guests sit down first. Coffee, folks? Martha makes the best you'll ever taste." As they settled into the living room, Alexander found himself studying the family dynamic. Ruby clearly adored Harold and Martha, climbing onto Harold's lap with the easy familiarity of a beloved grandchild, though Alexander noticed Harold wince slightly as she settled against him. Martha fussed over everyone, refilling cups and offering homemade cookies that were obviously a special treat. "Ruby," Victoria said gently, "Sarah told us you want to be a teacher when you grow up. That's wonderful. What would you like to teach?" Ruby's face became serious with consideration. "I want to teach little kids how to read because reading is important, and maybe art because I like drawing. Did you know that if you use your imagination, you can draw anything you want, even things that don't exist yet?" "That's very true," Alexander said, finding himself genuinely charmed by her earnestness. "What kinds of things do you like to draw that don't exist yet?" "Mostly families," Ruby said matter-of-factly. "I draw families doing things together, like going to parks and eating ice cream and reading stories before bedtime. Sometimes I draw myself with a mommy and daddy, but I always make sure to include Grandma and Grandpa too, because they take care of me and love me." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Alexander felt his throat tighten at the simple honesty of Ruby's words. Beside him, Victoria reached for his hand, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Ruby," Victoria said softly, "if you could do anything in the whole world with a family, what would it be?" Ruby considered this question with the gravity of a philosopher. "I think I would like to have dinner together every night, and maybe go to a real restaurant sometimes where they bring the food to your table on real plates and you get to choose from a menu. Grandma Martha cooks really good food," she added quickly, glancing at Martha. but sometimes I see restaurants in movies and wonder what it would be like." Martha's face flushed slightly, and Alexander saw Harold's jaw clench. He realized with dawning awareness that this wasn't about having enough food. The Williams family clearly fed Ruby well. It was about experiences, the little luxuries that most children took for granted. "What's your favorite food that you've never tried?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Ruby's eyes sparkled with dreams. "A hamburger from a real restaurant, with French fries that come in a red basket like in the movies, and maybe a milkshake that's so thick you need a spoon to eat it." Harold cleared his throat gently. "Ruby, remember what we talked about? Some things are for special occasions." "I know, Grandpa," Ruby said quickly. "I'm not complaining. Sometimes I draw hamburgers on my paper plates to make dinner more fun. Grandpa Harold told me that imagination makes everything taste better." The afternoon progressed, with Ruby giving them a complete tour of the small house. Her bedroom was tiny but cozy, with drawings taped to every available wall space. Alexander and Victoria examined each one with genuine interest, asking questions about the stories behind the pictures. Ruby had created an entire world in her artwork. Families having picnics, children playing in elaborate playgrounds, houses with big front yards and swing sets. "This one is my favorite," Ruby said, pointing to a drawing of a large house with multiple windows and a circular driveway. "I drew it last week. See, there's a room for everyone. Grandma and Grandpa get the room with the big windows because Grandpa likes to watch birds in the morning. And this room is for me, and this one is for the mommy and daddy, and this room is just for reading books." "It's beautiful, Ruby," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a very talented artist." As the sun began to set, Alexander realized that something fundamental had shifted inside him. This wasn't about charity or filling an empty space in their lives anymore. Ruby wasn't a project. She was a remarkable little girl who deserved every opportunity in the world, and he found himself desperately wanting to be the one to provide those opportunities. "Ruby," he said carefully, "how would you feel about coming to visit our house sometime? We have a big yard and lots of windows, and even a library with books that reach the ceiling." Ruby's eyes grew wide. "You have a real library, with actual books on shelves?" "We do," Victoria confirmed, "and if you wanted, you could help us pick out new books for it, especially books for children who want to learn to be teachers." "Would Grandma and Grandpa come too?" Ruby asked immediately, her loyalty shining through. Alexander exchanged glances with Harold and Martha, seeing hope and worry warring in their expressions. "Ruby," he said gently, "Grandma and Grandpa will always be part of your life, no matter what happens. They love you very much, and so do we." "You love me?" Ruby asked with the directness that only children possess. "But you just met me." Alexander felt his heart contract. "Yes, Ruby, we love you. Sometimes love happens very quickly when you meet someone special." As they prepared to leave, Ruby hugged each of them tightly. "Will you come back?" she asked, looking up at Victoria with hope in her eyes. "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Victoria promised, and Alexander knew she meant every word. Driving home through the darkening streets, neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "Alex, we have to do this. We have to find a way to make this work." "I know," Alexander replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But we need to be smart about it. That family has given Ruby everything they have emotionally, but they're struggling with the practical aspects. And Harold, did you notice how he was moving? That wasn't just age." "His heart condition," Victoria said quietly. "Sarah mentioned it. They love Ruby, but they're worried about their ability to care for her long term." Alexander felt the pieces of a plan forming in his mind. What if we could find a way to help everyone? Ruby gets the opportunities she deserves. Harold and Martha get security, and we get the family we've been dreaming of. The following Tuesday morning found Alexander in his downtown office, but his mind was miles away from the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he was thinking about a small house on Maple Street and a little girl who drew families she'd never had while making hamburgers appear on paper plates through sheer imagination. "Sir," Rebecca's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Morrison is here to see you." Alexander looked up to see Victoria entering his office, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the determined expression he'd learned to recognize over their 7 years of marriage. She had been making lists and researching since their visit to Ruby, and he knew she had developed a plan. "I've been thinking," Victoria announced, setting his coffee down and taking the chair across from his desk, "about Ruby, about Harold and Martha, about how we make this work for everyone." "Great minds," Alexander replied, leaning back in his chair, "because I've been thinking about the same thing, and I have an idea that might sound ambitious at first." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "More ambitious than a millionaire couple trying to navigate their first adoption?" "Potentially." Alexander stood and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. What if we didn't make them choose? What if we found a way for Ruby to have the security of a permanent family while maintaining her relationship with Harold and Martha? "I'm listening." Alexander turned back to face his wife. "We have 47 acres, Vic. What if we built Harold and Martha a house on our property? Not too close to feel intrusive, but close enough that Ruby could visit whenever she wanted. They could maintain their independence and dignity. Ruby gets to keep her grandparents close, and we all become one extended family." Victoria's eyes widened as she processed the implications. "Alex, that could actually work. But would they agree to it? Harold seems very proud, and they might see it as charity." "That's why we need to present it carefully," Alexander admitted. "Maybe we frame it as Harold helping with property maintenance. He knows more about fixing things than I ever will. Martha could help with household management if she wanted. The key is making it feel like a partnership, not a handout." Victoria was quiet for several minutes, her analytical mind working through the details. The adoption agency would probably see it positively. "It shows we're committed to preserving Ruby's existing relationships and providing stability for everyone involved." "There's something else," Alexander said, returning to his desk. "I've been thinking about what Ruby said yesterday, about wondering what restaurant food tastes like. What if our next visit included taking her out for that hamburger she's been dreaming about?" Victoria's face softened. "That's perfect. Something simple but special, just to show her that dreams can become reality." "All of us," Alexander corrected. "Harold and Martha should come too. This has to include them from the beginning, or Ruby won't feel comfortable." That afternoon, they found themselves back at the Williams house, this time with a carefully prepared proposal and nervous energy that had both of them fidgeting in the car before walking to the front door. Ruby answered their knock with paint-stained fingers and a beaming smile. "Alex, Victoria, look what I made." She held up a drawing that made both adults' breath catch. It was a picture of a house that bore a striking resemblance to the Morrison mansion, complete with carefully detailed windows and what appeared to be a smaller house beside it, connected by a winding path. "Ruby, that's incredible," Victoria said, kneeling to examine the artwork more closely. "Tell me about this smaller house here." "That's for Grandma and Grandpa," Ruby explained matter-of-factly, "because if I lived in the big house, they would miss me, and I would miss them. So they need a house close by where I can visit every day and maybe sleep over sometimes when I want to." Alexander and Victoria exchanged amazed glances over Ruby's head. "Ruby," Alexander said carefully, "that's a very smart idea. Did someone suggest that to you?" "Nope," Ruby said proudly. "I thought of it myself. It makes sense, doesn't it? Families should stay together, but sometimes people need their own spaces too." Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Ruby, sweetheart, let our guests come inside, and go wash those paint hands before you get color on everything." As Ruby skipped away to the bathroom, Martha led them into the living room, where Harold was reading a newspaper in his favorite armchair, a small pile of medication bottles on the side table that hadn't been there during their first visit. "Harold, Martha," Alexander began, settling on the edge of the couch with Victoria beside him. "We wanted to talk to you about Ruby, and about some ideas we've been having." Harold folded his newspaper and looked at them with cautious attention, though Alexander noticed the slight tremor in his hands. "We figured this was coming. Social worker called this morning, said you folks had requested to move forward with the adoption process." We have," Victoria confirmed, "but we want to make sure everyone is comfortable with how this progresses. Ruby loves you both deeply, and we would never want to disrupt that relationship." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "We love that little girl, like our own granddaughter, but we know we can't give her everything she needs. Harold's health isn't what it used to be, and we're not getting any younger. We can't provide the opportunities you could." "What if you didn't have to choose?" Alexander asked gently. "What if there was a way for Ruby to have both families?" Harold raised an eyebrow, though Alexander saw the hope that flickered in his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" Alexander took a deep breath. "We'd like to offer you both positions, helping us manage our property. Harold, I know you're retired, but we have 47 acres that need someone with experience to oversee maintenance projects. Martha, Victoria has been wanting help with household management. Someone with your skills would be invaluable." The room was quiet, except for the sound of Ruby humming in the bathroom. "And," Victoria continued, "the position would come with a house. A beautiful house on our property, large enough for both of you, and with a special room for Ruby whenever she wants to visit or sleep over. She could live with us, but spend as much time with you as she wanted." Harold's weathered hands gripped the arms of his chair. "You're offering us jobs and a house? Why?" "Because," Alexander said honestly, "Ruby has already drawn the solution. She needs all of us. And frankly, we need you too. We don't know the first thing about raising a 7-year-old girl. Ruby trusts you, loves you, feels safe with you. We want to learn from you." Martha was crying openly now. "I don't understand. Why would you do this for us?" Victoria reached over and took Martha's hand. "Because family isn't just about blood. It's about love and commitment and showing up for each other. Ruby considers you her grandparents, which means you're about to become our family too." Ruby bounded back into the room, her hands clean and her energy irrepressible. "Did you tell them about the house idea? Did you show them my drawing?" Harold looked down at Ruby with infinite tenderness, though Alexander noticed the way he shifted to relieve pressure on his chest. "Actually, sweetheart, they came up with the same idea you did." Ruby's eyes widened. "Really? Does that mean we can all live together? And I can have dinner with everyone every night?" "Well," Alexander said, glancing at Harold and Martha, "what do you think, Ruby? Would you like to come live with Victoria and me and have Grandma and Grandpa nearby?" Ruby launched herself at Alexander, wrapping her small arms around his neck with surprising strength. "Yes, yes, yes. And can we go get hamburgers to celebrate?" "Actually," Victoria said with a smile, "we were hoping you might want to come with us for dinner tonight, all of you, to get those hamburgers and French fries you've been dreaming about." Ruby's squeal of delight could probably be heard 3 houses away. An hour later, they were seated in a booth at Ruby's choice of restaurant, a family-friendly diner with red vinyl seats and actual red baskets for the French fries. Ruby sat between Alexander and Victoria, her eyes wide as she studied the menu with the intensity of a scholar researching ancient texts. "Grandpa Harold," she whispered loudly, "they have milkshakes here that are thick and creamy. What does creamy mean?" Harold chuckled. though Alexander noticed his breathing was slightly labored. "It means they're rich and smooth, like Martha's pudding, but cold. Can I really order anything I want?" Ruby asked Victoria, her voice filled with wonder. "Anything your heart desires," Victoria confirmed. "This is your celebration dinner." When the waitress arrived, Ruby carefully ordered a cheeseburger with French fries and a chocolate milkshake. She watched in fascination as their order was taken, asking the waitress detailed questions about how hamburgers were made and whether the French fries were really cooked in oil. "Ruby," Alexander said gently, "are you nervous about coming to live with us?" Ruby considered this question seriously, swinging her legs under the table. "A little bit. What if I don't know how to act in a big house? What if I break something expensive?" Victoria reached over and squeezed Ruby's hand. "Sweetheart, houses are for living in, not for worrying about. And if you break something, we'll clean it up and maybe learn to be more careful next time. That's what families do." "Will I have my own room?" "You'll have your own room, and you can decorate it however you want," Victoria promised. "We can go shopping together and pick out paint colors and furniture and anything else you need." "Can I paint a mural on one wall, like a big picture?" Alexander grinned. "Absolutely, the whole room is yours to make special." Biggie. When their food arrived, Ruby stared at her plate with reverence. The hamburger was perfectly assembled, the French fries golden and crispy in their red basket, and the milkshake was indeed thick enough to require both a straw and a spoon. "It looks just like my drawings," she breathed, "but better." She took her first bite of the hamburger with ceremonial care, chewing slowly and thoughtfully. Her face transformed with delight. "It tastes like happiness tastes," she announced. Harold wiped his eyes discreetly while Martha beamed with joy. Alexander felt his own throat tighten with emotion. It was just a hamburger, but for Ruby it represented so much more. New experiences, expanded horizons, dreams coming true. "You know what the best part is?" Ruby said, looking around the table at all four adults. "We're all here together, like a real family having dinner." "We are a real family," Victoria said softly. "We are just getting started." As Ruby carefully saved her last few French fries to remember later, Alexander made a mental note to himself. There would be many more dinners like this, many more simple pleasures to discover together. But he would never forget this first one, when a 7-year-old girl taught him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. They could only be shared. The drive home was quiet, with Ruby falling asleep against Victoria's shoulder, exhausted from excitement and the weight of life-changing decisions. Harold and Martha followed in their own car, and Alexander could see them talking earnestly in his rearview mirror. "She's perfect," Victoria whispered, stroking Ruby's hair. "Alex, we're really doing this. We're going to be parents." "We're going to be good parents," Alexander replied, his voice full of conviction. "With Harold and Martha's help and Ruby's patience while we learn, we're going to give her everything she deserves." As they pulled into the Williams driveway, Ruby stirred sleepily. "Alex? Victoria? Will you come back tomorrow?" "Every day," Alexander promised, "until you come home with us for good." "When will that be?" Victoria looked at Alexander, who nodded. "The paperwork will take a few months, sweetheart, but we'll visit all the time while we wait." "Okay," Ruby said with a yawn. "I'm going to draw a picture of tonight, so I don't forget how the hamburger tasted." That night, as Alexander and Victoria lay in their bed discussing timelines and logistics, they were interrupted by Alexander's phone buzzing with a text message. It was a photo from Martha. Ruby, fast asleep in her small bed, clutching a drawing of their family at the restaurant, her face peaceful and happy. "She drew us," Victoria whispered, studying the image. "She drew our family." Alexander pulled his wife closer, both of them staring at the photo of the little girl who had already changed their lives completely. Tomorrow would bring social workers and background checks and 1,000 details to arrange. But tonight, they simply held each other and marveled at how a simple dinner of hamburgers and French fries had 3 months after their first dinner at the diner. Alexander stood in his backyard supervising the construction crew that was putting the finishing touches on Harold and Martha's new home. The foundation had been poured in early November, and now, in late January, the house was nearly complete. Victoria had insisted on designing it herself, incorporating every detail Ruby had mentioned in her drawings. Large windows for Harold's bird watching, a cozy kitchen for Martha's cooking, and a special reading nook just for Ruby. Mr. Morrison. The construction foreman approached with a clipboard. Final walkthrough is scheduled for tomorrow. The Williams family should be able to move in by the weekend. Alexander smiled, remembering how long this day had seemed when they first proposed the idea. The adoption process had progressed steadily but thoroughly over the past months. Background checks, home studies, counseling sessions, and countless meetings with Sarah Chen. Ruby had visited their house dozens of times, gradually becoming more comfortable with the idea of it becoming her permanent home. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Just finished Ruby's school enrollment paperwork. She starts Monday after President's Day. Still nervous, but excited. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Ruby had experienced several anxiety episodes in December, worried about disappointing Alexander and Victoria or somehow not being good enough for their family. There had been tears over small things, spilling juice on the marble countertop, accidentally dropping a book from the library ladder, breaking a pencil during homework time. "What if you decide you don't want me anymore?" she had asked through tears one evening in December after struggling with a math worksheet that seemed too advanced for her current school's preparation. Alexander remembered kneeling beside her chair at the kitchen island, his heart breaking at her vulnerability. "Ruby, look at me. There is nothing, absolutely nothing you could do that would make us stop loving you. Families stick together through easy times and hard times. That's what makes us a family." That afternoon, Alexander found himself at 1247 Maple Street for what would be one of their last regular visits there. Ruby was at her current school, finishing her final week before transferring to Evergreen Academy, the private school where she would start fresh after the holiday weekend. "The house is beautiful, Alex," Martha said, as they sat in the familiar living room. "I walked through it yesterday with the contractor. I can't believe it's really ours." Harold nodded from his chair, looking healthier than he had in months thanks to new medication and regular cardiac monitoring that Alexander's insurance had provided through the employment arrangement. "Never thought I'd have a workshop again, especially one with all the modern tools you've put in there. You've earned it, Harold. And I have a list of projects as long as my arm once you're settled." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a school bus stopping outside. Moments later, Ruby burst through the front door, her backpack sliding off one shoulder and her face showing mixed emotions. "Grandpa Harold, Grandma Martha, Alex." She ran to each of them for hugs, but Alexander noticed the tension in her small frame. Today was weird. "Weird how, sweetheart?" Martha asked, automatically checking Ruby's forehead for fever, a grandmother's instinct. "Everyone kept asking me about my new school and my new family, and saying goodbye like I'm moving to another planet. Katie Morrison asked if I'd forget about her when I have rich friends." Ruby's lower lip trembled slightly. Alexander felt a familiar pang of protectiveness. They had anticipated this, Ruby's classmates struggling to understand her transition, perhaps feeling abandoned or jealous. "What did you tell Katie?" he asked gently. "I told her that real friends don't forget each other just because things change, and that maybe she could come visit sometime, if her mum says it's okay." "That was very wise," Harold said, lifting Ruby onto his lap. "Change is scary for everyone, not just you." Speaking of change, Alexander said carefully. "Would you like to see your new house? It's all finished." Ruby's eyes widened. "Really? Can we go right now?" 20 minutes later, they stood in front of Harold and Martha's completed home. Ruby ran from room to room, exclaiming over the morning light windows in the master bedroom, the spacious kitchen with a view of the main house, and especially her own special room with built-in bookshelves and an art station by the window. "This will be your room when you sleep over," Victoria explained, having arrived directly from her own work, "which can be as often as you want." Ruby stood in the center of the room and slowly turned in a circle. "So, I'll live in the big house with you and Alex, but I can come here whenever I miss Grandma and Grandpa?" "Whenever you want," Alexander confirmed. "This is your family too." Ruby nodded, but Alexander noticed she was chewing her lower lip, a habit that had emerged during stressful moments over the past months. "Ruby, what's bothering you?" Victoria asked, sitting on the bed and patting the space beside her. Ruby climbed up and leaned against Victoria's side. "What if I don't fit in at the new school? What if the kids there are really different from me?" "They might be," Victoria said honestly. "Some of them have grown up with different experiences than you, but you know what? You have something special that money can't buy." "What?" "You have kindness, creativity, and the ability to see the best in people. You've already shown us that when you worried about Katie's feelings today." Alexander joined them on the bed. "And if anyone at the new school doesn't appreciate those qualities, then they're missing out on knowing an amazing person." That weekend, they moved Harold and Martha into their new home with a celebration that included all of Ruby's favorite foods and a viewing of the photo album Martha had been creating of Ruby's time with them. "Look," Ruby said, pointing to a picture of herself at age 5, clearly taken shortly after her parents' accident. "I was so little and sad-looking. You were heartbroken," Martha said gently, "but look at this one from last month." The contrast was striking. Ruby at 7, beaming in the Morrison Mansion library, surrounded by books and art supplies, her face radiant with confidence and joy. "I look happy," Ruby observed. "You are happy," Harold said. "And you're going to stay happy because you're surrounded by people who love you." Monday morning arrived with Ruby's first day at Evergreen Academy. Victoria had taken the day off to drive her personally, and they had practiced the route twice over the weekend, so Ruby would feel familiar with the journey. "My stomach feels funny," Ruby announced as they pulled into the circular drive of the impressive school building. "That's normal," Victoria assured her. "Even grown-ups get nervous stomachs when they start something new." The school had prepared carefully for Ruby's arrival. Her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, was a warm woman in her 30s, who immediately put Ruby at ease by asking about her artwork and promising to display some of her drawings in the classroom. "We're going to take good care of her," Ms. Rodriguez assured Victoria as they watched Ruby cautiously approach a group of children working on an art project. That evening, Ruby burst into the main house full of stories about her new classmates, her teacher's kindness, and the amazing art room with supplies she'd never seen before. "And guess what?" she said, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "There's a girl named Sarah who wants to be a teacher too, and a boy named Marcus who draws comic books. And Ms. Rodriguez said I can help read to the kindergarten class once a week." Alexander and Victoria exchanged relieved glances. The transition was working, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. 2 weeks into February, Ruby had her first real meltdown since moving in permanently. It happened on a Wednesday evening during homework time, when she struggled with a reading comprehension worksheet that seemed to assume knowledge she didn't have. "I'm stupid!" she cried, throwing her pencil across the kitchen island. "Everyone else knows about ancient Egypt and I don't know anything." "Ruby Morrison, you're not stupid," Victoria said firmly, moving to sit beside her. "You're 7 years old, and you've had different experiences than some of your classmates. That doesn't make you less smart. It makes you unique. But what if I can never catch up? Alexander joined them at the island. Ruby, do you remember what you told me about teaching? That you wanted to help little kids learn to read? Ruby nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Teachers have to be patient with students who are learning. Can you be patient with yourself while you're learning too? I guess so, Ruby said uncertainly. How about this? Victoria suggested. Tomorrow we'll go to the library and check out some books about ancient Egypt. We'll learn together. Ruby's face brightened slightly. Really? You'll learn with me? Absolutely. I don't know much about ancient Egypt either. Oh, that Saturday afternoon found all three of them sprawled on the library floor, surrounded by picture books about pyramids, pharaohs, and mummies. Ruby was in her element, drawing her own hieroglyphics, while Alexander and Victoria read aloud from various books. I want to show Grandma and Grandpa, Ruby announced, holding up a drawing of what appeared to be a pyramid with a family standing in front of it. They walked over to Harold and Martha's house, where they found the older couple working in their new garden. Look what I learned, Ruby exclaimed, showing off her artwork and rattling off facts about ancient Egyptian farming techniques. Harold examined her drawing with serious attention. That's mighty impressive little bit. You know, learning new things keeps our brains healthy at any age. As they prepared to return to the main house for dinner, Ruby seemed thoughtful. Alex, Victoria, she said as they walked up the path between the two houses, thank you for not getting mad when I said I was stupid. Ruby, Alexander said, stopping to kneel down to her level, one of the most important things we want you to learn is that it's okay to struggle with something. That's how we grow. And it's definitely okay to ask for help. Even when I'm grown up? Especially when you're grown up, Victoria assured her. I still ask for help all the time. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, a tradition Ruby had insisted on maintaining, she seemed more settled than she had in weeks. You know what I realized today? She said, cutting her chicken into careful small pieces. What's that, sweetheart? Victoria asked. I used to think that being adopted meant I wasn't good enough for my real parents to keep. But now I think maybe it means I was so special that the universe made sure I found exactly the right family. Alexander felt his chest tighten with emotion. Ruby, that's the wisest thing I've ever heard. Really? Really? And you know what else? You didn't just find us. We found each other. Ruby smiled, the kind of radiant smile that lit up her entire face, like we were meant to be together all along. Exactly like that, Victoria agreed. As they cleared the dishes together, another family tradition Ruby had established, Alexander reflected on how much their lives had changed. The house felt fuller now, warmer, with Ruby's artwork on the refrigerator and her laughter echoing through the halls. Her backpack sat by the front door, her library books were stacked on the coffee table, and her presence had transformed their mansion into a real home. Tomorrow is Friday, Ruby announced as Victoria tucked her into bed. That means movie night. What movie are we watching this week? Alexander asked from the doorway. Something with a happy ending, Ruby said decisively. I like stories where families stay together. We have plenty of those, Victoria assured her, kissing her forehead goodnight. As they turned off the lights and closed Ruby's bedroom door, Alexander and Victoria stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to their daughter settle into sleep. She's really ours now, Victoria whispered. She was always ours, Alexander replied. We just had to find each other. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in early March. Alexander was reviewing architectural plans for a new Morrison Dynamics office building when Sarah Chen's name appeared on his phone screen. Mr. Morrison, I have wonderful news, Sarah began, her voice bright with excitement. Judge Hawkins has an opening in her calendar next Friday. We can finalize Ruby's adoption then. which means she'll officially be Ruby Morrison by the weekend. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. After 4 months of paperwork, home visits, and careful evaluations, it was actually happening. Next Friday? Sarah, that's incredible. Does Ruby know? I wanted to check with you first. The timing works well because it's during her spring break from school. She won't have to miss classes for the court hearing. After confirming the appointment, Alexander immediately called Victoria, who was in the middle of a client meeting, but abandoned it immediately upon hearing the news. I'll call the school and let them know she'll be starting the new quarter as Ruby Morrison, Victoria said breathlessly. Alex, this is really happening. We're going to be her parents, legally, officially, forever. That afternoon, they drove together to Evergreen Academy to pick up Ruby early, wanting to share the news in person. They found her in the art room, working on a watercolor painting with intense concentration. Ruby, Ms. Rodriguez called gently. Your parents are here. Ruby looked up, paint-stained fingers pausing mid-brush stroke. Is everything okay? You're not supposed to pick me up until 3:30. Everything is perfect, Victoria assured her, gathering Ruby's art supplies. We have something very special to tell you. They drove to their favorite spot, a small park overlooking Puget Sound, where they had gone many times over the past months to talk about important things. Ruby, Alexander began, sitting on a bench with Ruby between him and Victoria, how would you feel about officially becoming Ruby Morrison this Friday? Ruby's eyes widened, processing the meaning of his words. You mean the adoption? It's really happening. Really and truly, Victoria confirmed. Judge Hawkins wants to see us Friday morning to make it official. Ruby launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their necks in a three-way hug that lasted several minutes. I'm going to be your real daughter, she asked, pulling back to study their faces. You're already our real daughter, Alexander said gently. Friday just makes it official on paper. Can Grandma and Grandpa come to court with us? They wouldn't miss it, Victoria assured her. That evening, they celebrated with Harold and Martha over dinner at the guest house. Ruby could barely contain her excitement, talking a mile a minute about what it would mean to have the same last name as Alexander and Victoria. Will I get a new birth certificate? She asked, having learned about legal documents during one of their preparation sessions with Sarah. You will, Martha confirmed, wiping tears from her eyes, with Alexander and Victoria listed as your parents. But you'll still be my grandparents, right? Even if it's not on paper. Harold's voice was gruff with emotion. Little bit. Nothing could ever change that. Love doesn't need papers to make it real. The week passed in a blur of preparation and barely contained excitement. Ruby changed her mind about her court outfit 3 times before settling on a navy dress with small flowers that Victoria had bought specifically for the occasion. She spent Tuesday evening carefully writing in her journal about what she hoped to say to the judge. Thursday night, as Victoria tucked Ruby into bed, the little girl seemed unusually quiet. Ruby, are you nervous about tomorrow? Victoria asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Ruby nodded slowly. A little bit. What if I say something wrong? What if the judge changes her mind? Victoria smoothed Ruby's hair away from her face. Sweetheart, Judge Hawkins has already reviewed everything. Tomorrow is just a formality. She wants to meet you and make sure you understand what adoption means, but there's nothing you could say that would change her mind. What does it mean? Ruby asked. I know we've talked about it, but I want to make sure I understand. Victoria took a deep breath. It means that Alexander and I promise to love you, take care of you, and be your parents for the rest of our lives. It means you'll have our last name, and if anything ever happened to us, you'd be taken care of by people we choose. It means you belong with us forever. Ruby considered this seriously. And I promise to love you back and be the best daughter I can be? You already are the best daughter we could ask for, Victoria assured her. But yes, Families take care of each other. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, with spring air that carried the promise of new beginnings. Ruby woke up early, too excited to sleep, and found Alexander already in the kitchen making her favorite pancakes shaped like flowers. "Special breakfast for a special day," he announced as she climbed onto her stool at the kitchen island. Victoria appeared in her best suit, carrying a small wrapped package. "This is for you, Ruby, for today." Ruby carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a silver locket with a small ruby set in the center. Inside were tiny photos, one of Alexander and Victoria, one of Harold and Martha. "So you can always carry your whole family with you," Victoria explained, fastening the chain around Ruby's neck. The courthouse was bustling with activity when they arrived, but Sarah Chen was waiting for them in the family court lobby with a warm smile and a bouquet of flowers for Ruby. "Are you ready for this, Ruby?" Sarah asked. Ruby nodded solemnly, touching her new locket for reassurance. "I've been ready my whole life." Judge Patricia Hawkins was exactly as Sarah had described, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Ruby at ease. Her chambers were decorated with family photos and children's artwork from previous adoption ceremonies. "Well, Ruby," Judge Hawkins began, after reviewing the paperwork one final time, "I understand you want to join the Morrison family officially." "Yes, ma'am," Ruby replied politely, her voice clear despite her nerves. "They want to be my parents, and I want to be their daughter. And you understand that adoption means they'll be responsible for taking care of you, making sure you go to school, helping you when you're sick, and loving you every day." Ruby's face grew serious with the weight of the question. "Yes, Mum. But I think it means I have to love them back every day, too, and help take care of them when they need it." Judge Hawkins smiled warmly. "That's exactly right. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, do you promise to love, protect, and provide for Ruby as your own daughter for the rest of your lives?" "We do," Alexander and Victoria said in unison, their voices thick with emotion. "And Ruby, do you want Alexander and Victoria Morrison to be your parents?" "More than anything in the whole world," Ruby replied, her voice clear and certain. Judge Hawkins picked up her official seal. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I hereby grant this petition for adoption. Ruby, you are now legally Ruby Morrison, daughter of Alexander and Victoria Morrison. Congratulations to your beautiful family." The gavel came down with a solid thunk that seemed to echo with finality and new beginnings. Ruby launched herself at Alexander and Victoria, who caught her in a three-way hug that lasted for several minutes, while Harold, Martha, and Sarah wiped tears from their eyes. "I'm really your daughter now?" Ruby asked, pulling back to look at their faces. "Really and truly," Alexander confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Forever and always." "Can we go home now? To our house?" Alexander felt his heart swell at the possessive pronoun. "We can go home, Ruby. But first, I think someone mentioned wanting hamburgers to celebrate." The celebration lunch was at their original diner, where Ruby ordered the same meal she'd had on that first magical evening: cheeseburger, French fries, and chocolate milkshake. This time, though, the atmosphere was different. There was no tension, no uncertainty, just pure joy. "I want to make a toast," Ruby announced, standing up with her milkshake glass, "to families that choose each other and to dreams that come true even when you don't expect them to." The adults raised their glasses, all fighting back tears at the wisdom of their 7-year-old philosopher. "And," Ruby continued, "to hamburgers that taste like celebration and French fries that taste like love." As they ate lunch, Ruby shared her plans for their future with the confidence of someone who finally knew where she belonged. She would continue at Evergreen Academy, but maybe invite some classmates over to see her art studio. She wanted to plant a vegetable garden with Harold and learn to cook with Martha. and she definitely wanted to start reading to the kindergarten class every week because little kids need to know that reading is magical. After lunch, they drove to the Morrison estate for Ruby's official first day as a legal Morrison. Her few remaining belongings from the Williams house had been transferred earlier in the week, but today felt different, permanent, settled, home. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Ruby pressed her face to the window, looking at the mansion and the guest house with new eyes. "It's really mine now," she whispered in wonder. "It's really yours," Victoria confirmed. "All of it. The library, the art studio, the garden, everything." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table sharing stories from the day, Ruby seemed more relaxed than Alexander had ever seen her. "You know what the best part about today was?" she asked, carefully cutting her chicken into small pieces. "What's that, sweetheart?" Victoria asked. "When Judge Hawkins said Morrison family, she didn't say the Morrisons and Ruby. She said we're a family, all of us." Harold reached over and squeezed Ruby's hand. "That's because we are a family, little bit. Have been from the very beginning." Ruby smiled, the kind of radiant smile that lit up her entire face and filled the room with warmth. "I love being Ruby Morrison." "We love having you as Ruby Morrison," Alexander replied, and he meant it with every fibre of his being. As they cleared the dishes together, a tradition that had become sacred in their household, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Less than 6 months ago, he and Victoria had been a childless couple, struggling with loss and uncertainty. Now they were parents, part of an extended family that included grandparents and traditions, and Friday movie nights and Sunday garden walks. "Tomorrow is Saturday," Ruby announced, as Victoria helped her into her pajamas. "That means pancakes and art time." "What are you going to paint tomorrow?" Alexander asked from the doorway. "A family portrait," Ruby said decidedly. "All of us together. I want to hang it in the library so everyone who visits will know we belong together." As they turned off the lights and closed Ruby's bedroom door, Alexander and Victoria stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to their daughter, their legally adopted, forever daughter, settling into sleep in her own room, in their own house. "Ruby Morrison," Victoria whispered, testing out the sound of their daughter's full name. "Ruby Morrison," Alexander repeated, pulling his wife close. "Our daughter." 6 months after the adoption, Alexander found himself in an unexpected place, sitting cross-legged on his office floor, helping Ruby build an elaborate castle out of cardboard boxes, while she explained her latest plan to revolutionize elementary education. "And then," Ruby said, carefully taping another turret onto her creation, "the reading corner would have these big soft pillows, and kids could choose any book they wanted, and there would be art supplies right there so they could draw pictures about what they read." "That sounds like an amazing classroom," Alexander said, holding a wall steady while she attached it. "Ms. Rodriguez would probably love to hear your ideas." Ruby beamed. "Really? You think she'd listen to a kid's ideas?" "I think she'd listen to good ideas no matter who they came from." Victoria appeared in the doorway of Alexander's home office, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the amused expression she'd developed whenever she found her husband and daughter collaborating on one of Ruby's projects. "How's the castle coming along?" she asked, settling into Alexander's desk chair. "It's not just a castle," Ruby corrected seriously. "It's a school castle where kids can learn about medieval times by actually living in one for a day. See, this is the great hall where they'd have feast-style lunches, and this tower is the library, and this courtyard is where they'd practice being knights and ladies." Alexander caught Victoria's eye over Ruby's head. Their daughter's imagination seemed to grow more elaborate every day, fueled by constant exposure to books, art supplies, and adults who took her ideas seriously. "Ruby," Victoria said gently, "it's almost dinner time. Should we go see what Grandma Martha is cooking?" One of the best decisions they'd made was establishing a routine where Martha cooked dinner twice a week in the guest house kitchen, while Victoria and Ruby cooked together twice a week in the main house. It gave everyone a sense of purpose and ensured that Ruby maintained her close relationship with Harold and Martha. As they walked the path between the two houses, Ruby skipped ahead, then stopped suddenly and turned back to them. "Alex? Victoria? Can I ask you something?" "Always," Alexander replied, noting the serious tone in her voice. "Do you ever miss how quiet your house used to be, before me?" The question caught both adults off guard. Alexander knelt down to Ruby's eye level, studying her face in the early evening light. "Ruby Morrison, do you know what this house was like before you came to live with us?" Ruby shook her head. "It was beautiful and clean and perfectly organized," Victoria said, joining them on the path, "and it was the loneliest place in the world." "Really?" "Really," Alexander confirmed. "Buildings are just structures until families make them into homes. You didn't just move into our house, Ruby, you turned it into our home." "Even when I left Play-Doh on the marble counter?" Ruby asked with a small smile. "Especially then," Victoria laughed. "That's when I knew we were really a family." They found Harold and Martha in the guest house kitchen, working together to prepare what had become Ruby's favorite meal. Martha's homemade chicken and dumplings with Harold's fresh bread rolls. "Perfect timing," Martha announced as they entered. "Ruby, would you like to help me with the dumplings?" Ruby immediately washed her hands and climbed onto the step stool beside the stove, carefully dropping spoonfuls of batter into the simmering broth under Martha's guidance. Alexander watched the interaction with the same sense of amazement he felt every day. How naturally Ruby moved between her two homes. How seamlessly she'd woven all the adults in her life into one extended family. "Grandpa Harold," Ruby said as she worked, "will you tell the story about the engine that couldn't start?" Harold's eyes twinkled. "Which one? I've got about 50 stories about engines that wouldn't start. The one about the car that needed love instead of parts." As Harold launched into a tale about a classic car he'd restored through patience rather than money, Alexander found himself thinking about how much their lives had changed. Ruby had started second grade in the fall with confidence and enthusiasm. Her teacher reported that she was academically on track but socially ahead of her peers, often helping other children with problems and mediating playground disputes. "She has the wisdom of someone much older," Ms. Rodriguez had told them during the October parent conference. "But she's still very much a 7-year-old who loves to play and explore. It's a beautiful combination." Ruby had also begun volunteering at the local animal shelter every Saturday morning, reading to the rescue dogs because, as she explained, animals need stories too, and it helps them stay calm while they wait for their families. "Dinner's ready," Martha announced, and they gathered around the dining table in the guest house, a tradition for Wednesday and Saturday nights. As they shared the meal, Ruby regaled them with stories from her day at school, her weekend plans for a new art project, and her latest ideas for improving the world. "Ms. Rodriguez said I could present my school castle idea to the principal," she announced proudly. "She thinks other teachers might want to try some of my suggestions." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Victoria said. "You're going to change the world someday." "I'm going to change it now," Ruby corrected matter-of-factly. "Why wait until someday?" After dinner, they walked back to the main house together, all 5 of them, as had become their evening tradition. Harold and Martha usually stayed for Ruby's bedtime story, and tonight was no exception. As Victoria helped Ruby into her pajamas, Ruby seemed thoughtful. "Mommy Victoria," she said, using the name she'd chosen after the adoption. "Do you think my first parents would be happy that I'm happy?" Victoria felt her throat tighten. Ruby rarely talked about her biological parents, but when she did, it was always with the same thoughtful consideration she brought to everything else. "I think," Victoria said carefully, that parents want their children to be loved and safe and happy above all else. So yes, I think they would be very happy that you're happy. Good, Ruby said with satisfaction. I didn't want them to think I forgot about them. Love doesn't disappear, Alexander said from the doorway. It just grows bigger to make room for more people. They gathered in Ruby's room for story time, all 5 adults squeezing onto her bed while Ruby chose the evening's book. Tonight, she selected a story about a little girl who brought magic to everyone she met. This one reminds me of you, Harold said as Victoria finished reading. How? Ruby asked sleepily. Because everywhere you go, you make things better just by being there. As the adults quietly filed out of Ruby's room, leaving only Alexander and Victoria for final goodnight kisses, Ruby reached up to touch her locket, the one with photos of her whole family inside. Daddy Alex, Mommy Victoria? Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for finding me. Thank you for finding us, Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. 3 months later, on a sunny day in early spring, Alexander stood in the backyard, watching Ruby and Harold plant tomatoes in the garden they'd expanded every year since her arrival. Martha was teaching Victoria how to make Ruby's favorite cookies in the main house kitchen, and the sounds of laughter drifted through the open windows. Ruby had indeed presented her school castle idea to the principal, who had been so impressed that he'd invited her to share it with the school board. The result was a pilot program implementing some of Ruby's suggestions in the kindergarten and first-grade classrooms. Look, Daddy Alex, Ruby called, holding up a tiny tomato seedling. Grandpa Harold says this one will grow the biggest tomatoes because we planted it with extra love. Is that the secret ingredient? Alexander asked, joining them in the garden. Love is always the secret ingredient, Harold said with a grin, for growing things and for everything else. As Alexander knelt beside Ruby to examine their planting work, he marveled at how this little girl had transformed not just his family, but his entire understanding of what mattered in life. Morrison Dynamics was more successful than ever, but he rarely worked weekends anymore. Their house was no longer pristine, but it was alive with art projects and science experiments and the 1,000 small messes that came with raising an inquisitive child. Ruby, he said, watching her carefully water the newly planted seedlings, do you remember what you told me that first night at the restaurant? About hamburgers tasting like happiness? Ruby giggled. That was silly, wasn't it? Not silly at all. I think you were the first person to teach me that happiness does have a taste. It tastes like family dinners and bedtime stories and Sunday morning pancakes. It tastes like everything we share together. Ruby considered this seriously, her small face thoughtful. Then I guess love tastes like that too. Exactly like that, Alexander agreed. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had become sacred in their household, Alexander looked around at his family. Victoria discussing Ruby's latest art project with the enthusiasm of someone who had found her calling as a mother. Harold telling stories that made Ruby giggle until she nearly fell off her chair. Martha quietly making sure everyone had enough food and everything they needed. And Ruby, the center of it all, radiating the kind of joy that only came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. I have an announcement, Ruby said as they finished their main course. I've decided what I want to be when I grow up. Still a teacher? Victoria asked. A teacher and an artist and a mom, Ruby declared confidently. I want to teach kids how to learn by doing fun things, and I want to make art that tells stories, and I want to have a big family like ours where everyone takes care of everyone else. That sounds like a perfect plan, Alexander said, and I have a feeling you'll be excellent at all of those things. Ruby grinned. I learned from the best. Grandpa Harold taught me that building things takes patience. Grandma Martha taught me that cooking is like love you can taste. Mommy Victoria taught me that learning never stops. And Daddy Alex taught me that dreams are just plans that haven't happened yet. As Alexander looked around the table at his family, his wife, his daughter, his chosen parents, he realized that Ruby was right about dreams being plans that hadn't happened yet. He had started this journey thinking he wanted to give a child a better life. Instead, a child had given him a better life, one filled with purpose and joy and the kind of love that multiplied rather than divided when shared. "You know what, Ruby?" Alexander said, raising his water glass. "I think we should make a toast." "To what?" Ruby asked, raising her own glass with the solemnity she brought to all family rituals. "To empty plates that led to full hearts, to dreams that became reality, and to little girls who teach grown-ups how to see magic in everyday moments." Ruby giggled. "That's a long toast, Daddy Alex." "It's the truest toast I've ever made," Alexander replied, and as his family joined him in the celebration, he knew he had never spoken more honest words. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and inside, the Morrison family was living proof that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest acts of love, like sharing a meal, opening your heart, and believing that every child deserves a place at the table where they are treasured exactly as they are. Years later, when Ruby had become the teacher-artist mother she'd dreamed of being, she would still remember that moment, the taste of happiness around a dinner table, the sound of her family's laughter, and the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. And she would make sure that every child she taught, every family she helped, every life she touched, understood that love wasn't about what you could buy or provide. It was about showing up, staying committed, and always making room for one more at the table of your heart.